London has 45 billionaires, Michelin-starred restaurants on every corner, a skyline that looks like money itself learned how to build things.
2 hours north by train, a mother in Hull is deciding whether to eat today. Not because she made bad choices, because the prepaid meter on her wall just ran out. And it's January. The sixth richest country on Earth. That's what they still call it. But take London out of the equation, just those few square miles along the Thames, and the rest of the country's economy falls below Mississippi, America's poorest state. Right now, roughly 1 in 5 people here, close to 14 million, are living in poverty. Not struggling, not squeezed, poor. One country, two completely different realities. One of them is on the front pages of financial magazines. The other one doesn't make the news at all. So how did one island end up running two different economies?
Hold on to one date, 1986. In 1986, the British government made a decision that was celebrated as a triumph, a deregulation package so aggressive, so total, that it transformed London almost overnight. They called it the Big Bang. And it was a triumph for London. For everywhere else, it was a slow-motion disaster that is still detonating 40 years later. And by the time we get to the end of this, you'll understand exactly why a policy designed to make Britain richer is the single biggest reason Britain's falling apart in 2026. One that finally reached all the way to Downing Street recently. We'll get there. Keep 1986 in mind. Rewind to 1979. Britain is barely functioning. Inflation has eaten away 2/3 of the pound's value in a decade. Rubbish is piling up uncollected. The unions can shut the country down at will. Into this walks Margaret Thatcher. Thatcher's diagnosis was simple. Inflation is the disease, and we're going to kill it, whatever it costs. Her chancellor pushed interest rates to 17%, the highest in British history. The logic was textbook. Make borrowing expensive, slow the economy, strangle inflation. And it worked. By 1983, inflation dropped from 13% to 5%. But borrowing at 17% meant factories couldn't invest, couldn't expand. And the stronger pound made their exports too expensive to sell abroad. In 1979, manufacturing was nearly a third of the British economy. By 1990, it was 16%. Today, it's around 8%. Not a decline, an erasure. And it didn't disappear evenly. Steel in Sheffield, textiles in Bradford, coal across Yorkshire and South Wales, shipbuilding on the Tyne. These weren't just industries. They were the entire identity of entire regions. When the factories closed, nothing came to replace them. No investment, no government attention, just silence. More than 100,000 people were joining unemployment lines every single month at the peak. The policy was so widely opposed that 364 economists signed a public letter saying it had no basis in economic theory. Thatcher didn't blink. And 200 miles south, while the north was hollowing out, something else was about to happen. Something that would tilt the entire country in one direction, permanently. The people who designed it genuinely believed they were saving Britain. "1986. The Thatcher government does something that no British government had done before. They detonate the entire architecture of London's financial sector in a single day. The Big Bang. Fixed commissions, gone. Exchange controls, scrapped. The wall separating banks from owning brokerages, demolished. Foreign ownership of financial firms, welcomed with open arms. And the whole thing moved to electronic trading overnight. International capital poured into the city within months. The result was immediate and staggering. International banks poured £450 million into the city.
Over 1,000 new millionaires were minted almost instantly. By the time Thatcher left office, GDP had grown by roughly 40%, from £1 trillion to £1.4 trillion. Per capita income was up. On paper, a success story. But GDP doesn't tell you who actually has the money. Inequality, measured by the Gini coefficient, jumped sharply from 25% to 35% across those same years. Today, it sits at 33%. GDP per capita rose 30%. Inequality rose 40%. Britain was getting richer and more unequal simultaneously. And those two things weren't happening in spite of each other, they were happening because of each other. Here's the part most explanations skip. A factory employing 100 people supports roughly 900 jobs around it: suppliers, transport, the sandwich shop on the corner, the school built for the workers' kids. But financial services? Around 200 indirect jobs per 100 direct. The money doesn't spread outward, it concentrates. So when Britain swapped factories for finance, it didn't just change its economy, it changed its geography. Today, every region across the Midlands and the North sits below the UK's average income. Every single one. It made London the only place in the country where the new economy actually landed. So London won. Except, London itself now has the highest poverty rate of any region in England. Higher than the North. Higher than anywhere. How does the richest city in the country also have its worst poverty problem? London has median household incomes 14% above the UK average. On paper, it's the obvious place to go. Except Britons leave London faster than they move to it. Once you factor in housing costs, that 14% advantage shrinks to roughly 1%, unless you're in the top quarter of earners. For most people, moving to London doesn't make you richer, it makes you rent poor in a smaller flat with a longer commute. And how did London's housing get so untouchable? Some of this traces back to Thatcher again. The Right to Buy scheme let council tenants purchase their homes at discounts of up to 70%, no deposit required. Generous on the surface, but it permanently drained the social housing stock without any mechanism to replace it. London's social housing stock has fallen by close to half since 1980. In 1980, London had around 715,000 social homes. Today, it has roughly 390,000, and the large share of those former council homes are now private rentals, charging market rent to the same kind of household they were built to protect. Then the foreign buyers make it worse. There are essentially no restrictions on overseas buyers purchasing UK property. Roughly a quarter of London's residential sales recently went to buyers based abroad, compared to a fraction of 1% in New York. London is more exposed. The result, London's rough sleeper count hit a record high at the end of 2025. Across England, the rate of people sleeping rough has climbed 171% since records began in 2010. Overall, around 2% of Londoners are classified as homeless, compared to 0.8% in New York, 0.3% in Paris, 0.2% in Amsterdam. The city that's supposed to represent British success has a homelessness crisis that puts it in a league of its own among Western capitals. And this is the number that should actually stop you. As of last September, nearly 176,000 children in England were living in temporary accommodation. Not a one-off spike, the 11th consecutive record high. The fastest growing part of this crisis isn't even London anymore. It's the Northeast and Northwest. Rough sleeping there is rising faster than anywhere else in the country. Meanwhile, London receives roughly £1,200 per person in transport investment. The Northeast gets £430. The East Midlands gets £350. If the North had received the same per-person investment as London over the past few decades, it would have seen an additional $140 billion, enough to build 7 Elizabeth lanes. Britain is unusual among major developed economies in one specific way. The size of a city doesn't reliably predict how productive it is. Almost everywhere else, bigger cities are richer cities. They are more productive. Here, only one city breaks that pattern, and it's consuming everything around it. But systems like this don't stay abstract forever. Eventually, they land on people, real exhausted people. And in 2026, those people have stopped being quiet about it.
In places like Hull, the numbers above translate into daily life with brutal simplicity. As of last autumn, nearly half of the poorest households in Britain were behind on their bills. 7 in 10 were going without basic essentials. More than half had cut back on food or gone without it entirely. This isn't a story about poor decisions. It's what happens when a region's entire economic identity is dismantled over 40 years and nothing fills the gap. UK productivity growth has averaged just 0.6% annually since 2008. Real wages have gone backwards. Brexit added friction to trade without adding the promised freedom. Post-COVID inflation hit working-class households hardest. And public services, councils, libraries, youth centers, mental health services have been cut so deeply in some areas that the infrastructure of everyday life has effectively stopped functioning. The political consequences stopped being theoretical a while ago. In 2025, Hull elected its first regional mayor, Luke Campbell, a former professional boxer with no political background running for Reform UK. He won on a simple message. The existing parties had failed, and it was time to put local people first. Hull wasn't an outlier. In May 2026, Reform UK won over 1,000 council seats nationwide and took outright control of 12 councils, the largest gain by any party outside Labour or the Conservatives in modern English local election history. Labour fell to third place in national vote share, for the first time ever. The shockwaves didn't stop at the council level. Cabinet ministers began resigning. Andy Burnham, the mayor of Greater Manchester, the man who spent a decade rebuilding a post-industrial city from the inside out, won a by-election that returned him to Parliament and, within days, made him eligible to challenge for the leadership of the country. Few weeks ago, Keir Starmer resigned as Prime Minister. The man now positioned to replace him built his entire political career on regenerating the North. They call him the King of the North. 40 years after Britain decided finance was the future and the regions could fend for themselves, the country may be about to hand power to the one major politician whose entire career has been proving the opposite is possible. In 1986, Britain made a bet. Finance would be the engine. Prosperity would trickle outward from London to everywhere else. It didn't trickle. It pooled. 40 years later, the city that bet correctly is also home to the worst poverty rate in the country. London is one of the most expensive and unequal cities on Earth. The regions that built Britain's industrial strength have been left with crumbling infrastructure, defunded councils, and a record number of children with nowhere stable to sleep. And the anger that's been quietly building in Hull, in Blackpool, in Sandwell, in towns that never make the front page, it isn't quiet anymore. It just changed the Prime Minister. Right now, in a house in Hull, a prepayment meter is sitting at 0. And 2 hours south, in a glass tower over the Thames, someone is deciding where to take clients for dinner. Same country, same flag, same parliament that's about to change hands because of the gap between them. The divided kingdom was never a metaphor. It's a postcode. And for the first time in 40 years, the person about to run the country might actually understand that. Can one mayor's idea of fixing a city actually scale to fixing a country? Or does Westminster do to him exactly what it did to the North for the last 40 years?